Hello, everybody. My name is Bennett Jackson, and today we'll be going over my final project. My motivation for this was to look at COVID-19 cases and how they affected domestic flights in the US to see if there was any correlation between the two. I thought this was an interesting topic as we're just now getting out of COVID. Here are my data sources, and then here is my roadmap. But we have a lot to go over, so I'll keep moving along here. So all my COVID data was from the same source, which was New York Times. So they all had the same data types. So I could just concatenate them into one large data frame, as we can see down here. There's also some columns I don't need, like the FIPS. So I can work to clean that out. Additionally, the cases and the deaths are cumulative for county, so I need to convert that into a daily counter for each state. There wasn't a lot of issues with this. It was mainly just the size of the data. There was a lot of data to work with, but I wanted to make sure I got a full data set. So we see that we need to get rid of all the territories because we're only focused on the 50 states. Additionally, down here, we can start to see how we're aggregating that data and getting the daily counters, and then we bring it up to the state level here. We also can see our graph with the peaks of the COVID and all that. And then we can see that we have our daily counts and cases for each day for each state, which we've got to the final point that we want. And then we make an additional relational table which holds the IDs for the state. And that's the big part of the COVID data. Moving on to the airport data, we were really focused on the identifications of each airports and the types of airports. This was a lot easier to work with, not a lot of cleaning, so there weren't a lot of challenges here. We just needed to get rid of all of this random stuff. And then I wanted to get the small airports, the medium airports, and the large airports because we were mostly focused on domestic commercial flights. So when I cleaned the data, I got rid of all the extra columns and made sure it was only in the US. And then this is where that other table came in where I could use the abbreviations for each state to get a state ID number and make another relation. Overall, there was no issues cleaning this data. Um, Moving on to the REST API, this did have a lot of challenges with the API and how you make requests to it. Um, with having over 1,000+ days of data needing to be processed, but only the REST API allowing 2 hours of data to be sent in one request, it would have taken roughly 15 hours per my calculations to get the full data set. So I had to work on a modified data set, hence these dates right here. The JSON that the API returns is a lot of extra stuff I don't need. I'm only focused on the departure airport, the arrival airport, and the call sign. And I also only focus on the hours of 6 to 10 a.m. So you can see this is such a big thing that my notebook needs to reload. See here if we'll come back. There we go. Sorry about that. Um, so as we can see, we have to only do 2 hours per request to get the data back. So we looked at morning flights because that was the peak flying time. So once we get this back, we build up two data frames here, one with the total number of flights and then one with each flight's identification. So I look at the departure, arrival, and call sign here, and then I'll go through and aggregate it to give it some specific date IDs to relate back to the other data frame. I also go ahead and get the states and have those IDs. And then I go through and finish cleaning up the other data frame just to make sure that all the states are there, the unique IDs are there, and so on, just because we need a primary key when pushing to a SQL database. So finally, I'm left and I'm done with all of this cleaning. So I can look and see that there is a little dip in domestic flights, but it's not very conclusive compared to the COVID data, just due to the fact that I was unable to get a full data set from the REST API. Finally, we go through and push everything to the database, just do basic instructions here. And then we can get to my queries. So my first query was kind of looking at the total flights versus the total cases for each state. And this helped me to determine if there was a correlation between the amount of flights to a state and the total cases. This was actually interesting to see that it looks like there is a correlation. My second query is looking at flights that go, or the state within state lines, and then compare that to the cases. Um, this one wasn't very conclusive. For my third query, we'll look at the total deaths, also per state, just to see if there's any difference between the cases and the deaths and if that meant anything. For my fourth query, I look at Arizona specifically on a state level. And as we can see that it looks decently consistent at the beginning and the end, um, but we're unsure because there weren't a lot of morning flights to begin with. Can't really tell. Finally, the fifth query here is to look at the total number of new cases versus the total flights on a monthly basis. So these are two peaks that I kind of wanted to stay around. So as the numbers are growing here, we see that it can dip a bit, but as the numbers fall, it looks like there is some more, what's it called? Sorry. It looks like there's um, a change in the flights here, but as we can see, there is a lot of zeros, which means that, or it's because I couldn't get a lot of that data from the REST API, unfortunately. Overall, this was a really big project with lots of data. I wish I had more computing power to actually be able to get and fill in all this data. Additionally, here is my schema that I drew up for my database. As we can see, there's a lot of relations right here. The red star is the primary key for each table. Overall, inconclusive, but I find this very interesting, and I would like to hopefully get more computing power to actually view this. Thank you for listening to my presentation.